whenever you are ready.
I'm Brooklyn, and I'll be talking about the French culture and their primary language and how that has caused a lack of cultural diversity. So the question is, how does a country like France that has experienced such a change in culture since the French Revolution and primarily speaks the French language by law, create a cultural diversity for its population? In this picture, you can kind of see how people see the French culture today. It shows simplicity and elegance, food, fashion, and the Eiffel Tower. At the time, pre-revolution, everything in France was put into social classes: the clerks, the knights, and the peasants. The peasants were the lowest class and they were treated as such. I got this information from chapter 16, The Life of Peasants, which talks to you about how the peasants lived their lives and how they were treated before the revolution. The culture of the time believed in the heavens, and they also believed in the supernatural, but they believed that the heavens controlled everything and everyone. They also believed that the heavens decided what social class a citizen was put into and that everyone had to be treated according to this social class. I also got this information from chapter 16, The Life of Peasants. Now, during the revolution, the peasants had the ultimate control. And, and they also lived on the land of the Lord. Because they were too poor to buy their own land and they lived on his land, they had to ask for consent to marry someone else and occasionally pay a fee for this marriage. Not only this, but they had to give a portion of their goods to their lord as payment for living on his land. Although they were very poor and could hardly afford a loaf of bread, they were still expected to pay high taxes to the nobles. It was this way of living that caused the French peasants to revolt, and this triggered the French Revolution. The peasants resented the concept of royal absolutism, and they wanted their own land instead of working on someone else's. They resented the nobles who were allowed varied privileges, and they were unhappy and discontent with their place and earnings in society. The French Revolution began on July 14, 1788, with the storming of the Bastille, and the peasants had ultimate control. I got this information from the teaching PowerPoint, Peasantry and the French Revolution. Now this control came with chaos and riots, with the leaders of the time, Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI, being sentenced to treason. They were sentenced to treason because of the way they chose to live their life while their people suffered. These riots that ensued only created more chaos and more unemployment, which is what the peasants were fighting for. I didn't click that button. Sorry. Anyway, in this picture, you can see art that depicts what riots would have looked like at the time. Okay. So, after the French Revolution, France gained an appreciation for feminism, which started with the salon women during the French Revolution. These women were often daughters and wives of aristocrats and politicians. These people often took their women's ideas with them to the government, and this is what led to France today, where there are laws against street harassment. Feminist activists and politicians have focused on the concept of parity, which is more representation in the government. And there's also a law that requires half the political candidates of any given part to be women. I got this information from Feminism and Equality, France Males Gender Equality, a Global Cause. This article was written by Erica Hope Spencer, and it is about feminism in France today. France also gained their motto for unity, which in English is liberty, equality, and fraternity. This has been in use since the Revolution. Bastille Day also came as a result. This is a national holiday and a symbol of unity which celebrates the French Revolution and what has occurred from it. It's celebrated on July 14th. Of course, today there are no longer peasants in France, and the government is more inclusive of women. But France has also began primarily speaking French since the Revolution. This is by law, so even if French is not your first language, French is spoken and you must speak it in a public setting. In Vanishing Voices, Reimer speaks about the loss of languages. He has a list of dominant languages and lists Mandarin and English, Russian and Hindi, and Spanish and Arabic. He says that these languages extend to seemingly every hamlet. However, French is not listed in this list of dominant languages. So it begs the question, could French eventually disappear over time. However, this is extremely unlikely because of this law. However, cultural diversity is very slim to the public eye because of this law. This makes citizens unified, but it does remove their access to other cultures outside of French. A solution, I'm not hitting the button, I promise. A solution to this issue would be for the French government to have classes in schools about other cultures and that these classes be taught in other languages. These languages being regional languages that are in France. Learning about these other cultures and teaching in other languages could bring awareness to the amount of cultures that there really are in France. And it could also help those who don't speak French as a first language. However, there is a limitation to this. This would be that the French Assembly has actually attempted something similar to this in the past, but the bill did not pass. In 2021, the French Assembly approved the bill allowing the primary schools to teach the majority of school languages in a regional language and the rest of the subjects in French. However, the Minister of Education appealed this bill, saying that it was unconstitutional. I got this information from an article called Linguistic Terror by Xavier Araujo. Because something similar to this solution has already occurred and failed, it could be difficult to get another bill like it to pass. It is possible, however, to have these classes without affecting France's idea of unity. These classes could be optional and held as an elective for students to sign up for. They would bring knowledge of other cultures and allow languages other than France to be publicly spoken. This could also allow the regional languages in France to be saved from extinction. As French is the primary language, these other languages are overlooked. So having them spoken in this setting could also save them from disappearing, which is another thing that Reimer speaks of in Vanishing Voices. Ultimately, this would lead to a more cultural diversity in France because of their newfound knowledge and acceptance of these languages and cultures. And there's my sources, which I know it kept bringing you to earlier.
Let's see. How did you approach and synthesize the different perspectives in order to reach a conclusion?
When I was researching, I just looked at all of the information that I wanted to collect, and then in those sources that I found, I decided to look at what area and what direction that those sources were coming from, and I decided to connect that to how I wanted to go in my argument. And with that information, I decided to go into my conclusion saying that the French language is that is a main part of their culture, but you can use the other languages to have more cultural diversity.
Okay. What additional questions emerged from your research, and why are these questions important?
For me, it was the simple question of why. In my research, I could talk to you about pre-revolution, during the revolution, after the revolution, and today, all looking towards their language and how it's spoken. But through this research, I found that France has always seemed to progress in world beliefs and in technology as well. But if they're so willing to progress in that, why were they so unwilling to progress in allowing different languages in a public setting? What was their reason behind that, other than their idea of unity?
All right, thanks.